All right. Okay, so welcome everybody to this video. This is the first in what I hope becomes a series. So where we're going to be diving behind the abstracts or beyond the abstracts and talking to people that have been involved in education or research in some way that connects to autonomy, right? And then we have our first guest today, which is Isobel Hook, who's here. And Isobel, before we get started kind of diving into the meat of our conversation, would you mind telling us a little bit about yourself? So who are you, your kind of background, any academic interests that you have? Yeah, Isobel.
Sure. So as Tom said, my name is Isobel Hook. I'm currently working at Kyoto Notre Dame University. I'm the coordinator of the iSpace there, which is the Self-Access Learning Center or Self-Access Center. So this is my first year at this school, and it's also the first year for the Self-Access Center to be running this way at this school. I was in Self-Access a year prior to this at Konan Women's University. And previous to that, I was working at universities and other educational institutions in Japan, also in South Korea, and a little bit of English teaching in Australia as well. So I've been teaching for a little over 10 years, teaching English as a second language or foreign language for a little over 10 years. And I've been working in self-access for about 2 years.
Okay, so you've moved from Australia to South Korea and Japan?
Well, South Korea, Australia, South Korea, Japan, but
okay.
Yeah.
So what, if I can ask, what was it that kind of prompted you to choose those places?
South Korea was a good entry point for English language teaching. I think it is for a lot of people. That really sparked my interest in education. I decided to go with it further. Moved back to Australia while I was getting my CELTA and was teaching somewhat in Australia. Started doing my master's degree. Wanted to move out of Australia at that point, and South Korea was a familiar country where I knew I would be able to work easily and live comfortably while studying as well. And then Japan offered more, I guess, more opportunities or more ways to branch out in this career field, I felt. So I came to Japan as a sort of a growing as a teacher situation. The visa requirements and teaching opportunities are different between Japan and South Korea, and so Japan suited me a little bit better at that stage.
Okay, yeah, it's the place that I've spent most of my working life as well. So it's always interesting for me to hear, what brought people there to the kind of same place as me. Everyone's got their own story always.
Yeah.
So you mentioned the iSpace,
yes.
Which is the Self-Access Center at the university that you're currently employed at. Can you talk a little bit more about what it is and kind of who is behind getting it started?
Sure. So basically, first I'll say Self-Access Center, Self-Access Learning Center, SAC, SALC. For me, in this situation, it's all kind of the same thing. So apologies if we switch back and forwards. We have a space set up at my university called the Immersion Space, and we've sort of branded it as iSpace. The space itself as an immersion space has been set aside for about 5 or 6 years. It's not a confined space. It is a hallway / corner of a building without walls between other classrooms. It's a bit of an odd space. If it wasn't used for this, it would probably otherwise be used as a common room or a student lunchtime area. It got taken over by the English department for basically English cafe style things for a while. Teachers and other staff members were spending occasional lunchtimes in there, having conversations with students. It's got tables, a couple of small sofas. It's also got a little kitchenette area with a sink and a microwave and things like that. So encouraging students to bring their lunch and eat there. However, it was always functioning as a English cafe only. There was no self-access drive behind it previously. And prior to 2019, it fell out of use a lot, and just became an area for students to have their lunch. But the immersion side of it dropped off, about a year or two after it started. There also wasn't any dedicated teachers pushing it forwards and really driving the space and defining the space. During COVID, because the space was defined by the physical location so much, it wasn't able to survive through students being off campus.
Right.
And so at that stage, they were like, well, this space isn't being used at all. These resources aren't being used at all. They wanted a drastic shift. We might talk a little bit about this later, but the funding allocations moved between departments a little bit, which meant that they were able to bring me in as a full-time worker for the iSpace. And so that's when I'm bringing in the self-access part of the self-access center. And that has been a major shift. So when I say I'm starting the space new, the physical space itself isn't new, but the self-access drive behind it is brand new.
This kind of like iteration of it is new, right?
Yeah.
And started off by you. It's kind of what you kickstarted. It sounds like a interesting kind of layout.
Yeah.
Does that challenge you at all?
Yeah, definitely. There's, essentially, if you're thinking of the space, we have two walls, which are, a window and a wall going into a room with computers. The other two walls are kind of a hallway on the way to classrooms. So you don't, we've used the furniture as much as possible to make a zone. So students feel like they're entering a zone or exiting a zone. But there is a lot of cross chatter. We're also right next to the stairwell that goes directly downstairs to the cafeteria. So students are just walking backwards and forwards to lunch. So making it any sort of language-bound zone is just not possible for us, which influenced how we approach the space itself and what our goals are specifically. But those physical limitations definitely did define how we use it. Yeah.
Okay. So first day, when you got in there, how did you go about kind of defining this space that sounds like it's on an open corridor, like near a stairwell to a highly trafficked cafeteria? That sounds like quite a big task to jump in and start doing. And I just wondered how you got started on that process.
Yeah. So a lot of it started when I was interviewing for the position and talking to the other staff members about how it had been used previously. And they were talking about it became a lunchtime social space. It is quite a come and go area. Students don't come to this space for a set amount of time. And, these students are moving out of online learning into face-to-face learning for this entire year. So my focus immediately went like, okay, well, what students are needing at this point is community. And so I'm going to base my ideas and how we move forwards around this idea of building community. Eventually, I'd like it to be a language learning community, but at the moment, I'm just focusing on the bringing people together, bringing people in type of thing. And that allowed us to have this drop-in, drop-out sort of system, and that students passing on the way to classrooms can see groups of students gathering in a communal way or working together or having fun together. And that really sends a strong message of what is the purpose of this space. I think the downside is that we don't have a specific space for us. So students find it difficult to come in and out of a zone, or code switching in that sense, I guess. The positive of that is that we are very public and people can see us, and any teachers walking past know what we're doing and can have a visual example of what we're trying to achieve.
I was gonna say I'm aware that issues of space are quite important in self-access centers and that community as well, I think, and then also just making it a social area to be. So in some ways it seems like it could also be an advantage, right? That it's advantageous, right? As you mentioned, so it's kind of a low commitment, drop in, drop out. You mentioned people can come eat there. They're not required to remain there for any period of time. So would you say that you were able to kind of leverage that to
Yeah, absolutely. The low commitment thing is a key thing as well, because students will often come, they know their classroom is next to the space or attached to the space kind of, and then they can see our sofas that look really comfortable. So they'll come and sit and hang out on the sofas for 10 minutes before their class starts, which gives them this low stakes opportunity to say, hi, how are you today? Oh, very nice. I have class now, and go. It's these little interactions that are built into their day rather than this is a chore I'm doing, this is a space I'm entering, that this is homework or something.
Okay, so it's kind of being more led by them and their kind of volition there to come in and start using the space, right? At all. So how would you advise other people that were coming in charged with a similar responsibility to you? Obviously the specifics of each space will be very different, but are there any kind of I don't know, general principles that you've learned from this experience that you think would be applicable across the board?
It's easier to adapt a culture than to change a culture. It's easier to and more beneficial, I think. It's better to understand what is currently happening and try and steer that onto a track that is beneficial for language learning, rather than coming in and saying, these are our rules and you have to stop what you were doing previously and do it this way. So like a self-access center can be as much as a bookshelf within a classroom or an online forum, or it can be an entire building in a hugely well-funded university.
Right.
They are all access centers and they can all provide something to students. It's what do the students require and what works with them in their current situation.
Right, I see. I can see that there's a range there in terms of the facilities that are available. You mentioned it could be as little as just a bookshelf within a classroom. Can you paint a bit more of a picture about what are the materials that are available for learning in this area, the iSpace?
So in our iSpace, if you're looking at it in a budget sense, our resources are things like graded readers, non-graded readers, a couple of non-graded readers, English language, Japanese newspapers. We've got a couple of computers. The computers are installed with cameras and microphones for Zoom or online activities specifically. There is a quiet study space. So in the Zoom room that we call it, there's also a little desk that's set up if a student wants to sit quietly and study somewhere, and pens and paper and dictionaries and whatever they might need. Because we have the kitchen, we have a kettle and a microwave and tea and coffee, little sachets. But that's things that we have to pay for or an ongoing cost. I think the most important resources that we have available are dedicated community space. So tables that are in a circle that are comfortable for sitting at lunchtime. A sofa that we got secondhand off, I think, Facebook Marketplace or somewhere. But that's a comfortable, welcoming space to sit together with someone else. And people are a massive resource that don't often get put on those lists. And people are what draw students in, keep people interested, and what set the atmosphere.
Right.
So it's an amount of availability of someone, and the person doesn't need to be an expert. The person doesn't need to be a teacher. often the availability is of student staff or other common room staff, like other non-teaching faculty who are there, who can say, yes, you can borrow the books, or yes, if you want to use the computer, go for it. Often you require that personal permission to be able to enter the space. So someone who just smiles and goes, yeah, use the table, sit down, take a seat.
Kind of, give permission for people to come in and use the space.
Yeah.
I see. So it does sound quite comfortable with all these kind of tea and coffee making facilities, the round, the tables kind of set up so people are looking at one another, and then also having people there, right, as a resource. I like that idea that they're like the main resource that you've got to have. I suppose that's challenging, right? If there's budgetary concerns as well. How do you get those student staff to come in and do those jobs which take up their time? So do you kind of reward them in some way?
Yeah. So there's two ways of thinking about student staff, and the first is that I'm fortunate enough I've allocated about half of my budget to hiring the student staff. So they get paid minimum wage, but they do get paid. They will, at the beginning of the semester, they decide their working times according to their class schedule. So they're able to have class first period. And then when usually they would have nothing in second period, they can come and work for an hour and a half or 2 hours or so, and then have their third period class. So it fits very neatly with their class schedules. I am insistent on paying someone for work. A lot of places use it as purely volunteer situations. But I find students are more reliable, and there's a more clear expectation of work if you're getting for it, right? The other side of student staff is that it is part of their own growth as well. When you're growing as a learner, you start receiving the information, accessing the information, understanding, sharing, and then, feeling that confidence within whatever it is you've learned. So when students are building that confidence, part of what confirms their knowledge for themselves is to be able to share that with someone else. And so regardless of a student's language level, having the authority in the space and having the confidence, even if it's practiced confidence, to say, yes, I am working in English and I'm inviting other people to participate in this, is a huge confidence builder. And it's a huge sense of affirmation for them that they are in control of their learning. They are in control of their growth.
Right. So this kind of hiring approach and also the space design, that's how you've tried to build this little sense of community there to get that kind of investment.
Yes.
Right? Kind of not monetary investment, but investment of time. For most people. And it sounds like that it kind of slots into the schedule of those student staff in some ways, like, so it's kind of tied to the rest of the school there in some way. Are there any other connections that you tried to build between the iSpace and the rest of the university as a whole that make it a more viable proposition?
A lot of what I encourage students to, it's a push and pull between me being the manager or the coordinator and me wanting it to be student led. So there's a lot of decisions I have to make on behalf of the center, but I try to get feedback from students about which decision I should make. So that includes if there's a group of students, first year students, doing their homework at one of our tables. If they look not too busy, I'll come and sit down with them and be like, hey, thanks for using the space. What do you want more of in here? And like, oh, we read the books, but we finished all of the books. I'm like, cool, I can get you more books. Do you want harder books or easy books? They go, oh, easy books. I'm like, cool, that's what I'll buy. Making it very clear that I'm buying it for them according to their wishes. The other thing is that that's where student staff come in handy a lot. Is I'll say, I want to do a Christmas theme this month. What events would you like to have in here? What things would you like to see? And they say, oh, we want decorations, or we'd really love to do like a Christmas meal together. I'm like, okay, you organize it. I'll provide money and the coordinating with the faculty and things. But, you know, gently putting it back onto students to say, what is it you want? What is it you want? And I say to them explicitly, like, I'm, you know, a 35-year-old foreigner. I don't know what Japanese young women want. Tell me what you want, and I'll give it to you. You know, so it's that sense of authority, that sense of ownership over the space.
Right, and that's definitely going to be important to again continue making this sense of investment in the space, that it's, you know, something that they have a say in, for sure. I guess I was wondering, not just on the level of being directed by their personal interests in having, you know, different kinds of reading materials or certain events. Is there any tie-in with their courses, like their required English courses or their majors or any other kind of university programs that kind of tie it in some way?
On the small end of the scale, we have graded readers, and in their reading class, they do have an extensive reading program. So getting those books out of the teachers' classrooms and putting them in the iSpace instead makes it a gathering point for reading. There are a lot of, so the graded readers in our space get used extensively. We have dozens of books borrowed every day. There is a set of graded readers in the school's library that get used maybe once a month. The borrowing rate on them is incredibly low because it's just a different environment. It's a different way to access them, right? So we're trying to get those books brought in, but that's a, you know, between different departments agreement that needs to be made. So there's access to materials. The next level up would be that because it's quite a small women's university, a lot of teachers will be teaching a class that have 2, 3, or 4 students. Very, very small class sizes. And it's often more comfortable for them to say, let's just have our class in iSpace instead of in a classroom. Because a classroom, you have a whiteboard, you have a teacher's podium, you have desks that are lined up. But if you move it over to iSpace, we have power plugs or, you know, extension cords for everyone's laptop. Everyone sits in a circle. It's comfortable. You can make a cup of tea while you have class. So those lessons are entirely physically relocated into the iSpace. And that allows students at other tables who are, you know, maybe starting out their English journey, they can sort of listen into these lessons and listen into this daily conversation or, you know, discussion in English. The step up from that is, on top of doing the Self-Access Learning Center, I also teach about 5 classes a week. And in many of those classes, I have made their homework component to be participation in activities in the iSpace. So for me, homework can be something like reading a book or preparing vocabulary or doing a worksheet. But my message in my English classes is that participation in a language learning environment is more valuable than a worksheet. That sitting down and trying to join a conversation is better for your speaking than pre-writing a script and recording yourself speak. Like, they have different values, but I think the community is what they can benefit from most, especially while they're at university. So for those, I've created sort of stamp cards. If you attend a 30-minute lunchtime chat, you get a 1 stamp. If you come to a 90-minute event, you get 2 stamps, sort of, yeah.
Okay, so these are all ways you've tried to boost kind of usage of the iSpace.
It works in both direction. It helps the iSpace get more attention and awareness and participation. and it helps students from other departments be specifically invited into a space that they might think is only for the English department.
I see.
So I teach students in other departments as well. I teach them basic English classes. And they're like, oh, okay, well, I came there once a week in Isobel's class last year. I'm able to keep coming once a week throughout my later career. You know, it gives them permission by doing that.
Okay. I noticed a few times you mentioned, or you kind of brought up the fact that it's a women's university and the primary users are women. Does that alter how you approach designing the space in any way? Like, would you approach it differently had it been a co-educational school, or would that not made a difference at all?
I'm not sure, because I've worked in co-ed universities before, and there's definitely senses of community, there's senses of inviting people in, there's a lot of the same things I'm looking for, but I've only ever done self-access in women's-only universities.
Okay.
So I don't have that familiarity. I think I have lent towards community and friendship building because it is a women's university, but I think I would do that still in a co-ed environment. I don't think that would drop off. It's just, yeah.
Okay. No, I just wondered whether that was a factor or not.
Yeah, there is an element of gender that comes into this as well, in that it's the women's university. I'm a woman. I think there is a more availability of me as we talk about identity, and I have a teacher identity, but I also have a self-access learning identity, and they behave different ways in different environments. And being a woman speaking to young women, there is a familiarity, there's a closing of that gap in hierarchy. Which
so that probably goes into like making it a more welcoming place, helping to boost the engagement with the center, right, as it is.
Yeah.
How long have you been doing this?
So self-access for 2 years.
So the iSpace running has been 2 years so far. So compared to
my last year, I was 1 year at a different women's university, and then this year has been 1 year at this women's university.
Okay, I see. So you're a year into this particular project then. How do you feel you're doing when you kind of take a retrospective look? We're recording this interview at the end of the year, so it's quite appropriate, but the calendar year, I mean. But how do you, when looking back, how do you evaluate the efforts that you've gone so far?
There's hard data that we can look at. Anyone starting a space, I would very much recommend taking data, because that's something that you can show to faculty meetings or whatever. You can say this many people used it this many times, type of thing. But the other side, which is a little bit more ambiguous, is student investment in the space, students' relationship with the space, and that kind of stuff. Even if you're doing a survey of student base, it's quite hard to tell. But I have students who are using the space regularly. I have first-year students who first started meeting in iSpace because they had nowhere else to go at lunchtime, have now formed friendship groups that meet regularly in iSpace. Not even study-based groups, they're just friendship groups. I have student staff and non-student staff approaching me and requesting things or recommending things, which shows that they're invested. They want it to improve. They want it to meet their needs better. So I sort of see my time at this university as being on a continuum, and I've done a lot of the setup stuff now. I need to start working on the long-term things. So I've created an environment, I've created goals for this space, but I need to refine them more. So turning it from just a community space into a learning community, or into a language learning community.
Yeah, that's going to be my next question is, so where are you on that continuum, you've done a lot of establishment work there to build a sense of community. So how are you going to integrate the feedback, from the users of the space or the staff, right, or the other departmental people into kind of channeling that towards the kind of learning community that you want to develop? Do you have any, ideas or things that you're planning to do?
Yeah, I'm interested in starting to work more on the concept of growth mindset. So I have a lot of students who have motivation, extrinsic or intrinsic motivation. They are interested in using the space. They're aware that it's useful, but they're not sure, or they're not clear on how to grow with that and how to sort of level up or skill up, as they would say. So this year, just because of my teaching load and other requirements, I haven't been able to do any advising sessions or any one-to-one student engagement sessions, which I think would be quite important next year, because I have students who are coming in regularly, they're participating, it's been part of their homework, they seem to enjoy the space, and now we need to say, well, what are your goals and how can you meet your goals? Rather than, oh, I came to class, but I didn't reach my goal and I don't know what to do about it,
So yeah, learning advising or language advising. What is that? Because I think that's like a term of art in the field, right? What does it mean exactly?
It can come in lots of different forms, but basically on the surface, it's advising students on what their next move academically or in their language learning growth should be. When you dig into it further, it's a lot more about encouraging self-reflection from a student. So a lot of students will come in, they'll see, learning advising, and they'll come in seeking advice. But if you are considering that the best way for a student to learn is individual for each student, and that they know their motivations or they understand their direction better than you do, then the best thing an advisor can do is keep putting that question back on the students. Not saying this should be your goal, saying what is your goal? Okay, how do you want to get there? What is the best way for you to get there? What are some methods? And then the advice comes in that a student might say, oh, I'm studying for the TOEIC test, but I can't keep my study system, or, I can't keep regular with my studies. Saying like, oh, we've got this TOEIC club. They meet once a week. Or I want to study for TOEIC, but I don't know how to do it. I'm like, oh, did you know we have these resources here? We have the audio on the computers and we have these textbooks that you can use. But the encouraging the direction to come from the student themselves. And that hopefully will teach them how to do that better for themselves in the future. Teaching them that they do actually know what's best for them, and that if they sit down and consider it and think through it, that they do know their own answers, but just getting that confidence in trusting themselves, in understanding their own process, which is kind of what I consider autonomy, learning autonomy to be.
Okay. Autonomy being?
Learning autonomy being a student's understanding of their own learning process.
Okay, right.
So an understanding of where they are, and an understanding of where they want to be, and an understanding of how to get from step 1 to step 2. Even if they don't know the micro steps, the process that they want to go through.
So would you say that this is like your kind of idea for the future of the iSpace, is that you see yourself taking over this responsibility of being the language advisor, or is this something that the student staff will be doing as kind of like more experienced learners? Or how do you see that playing out?
I would like it to be both. I think students who have a strong student identity, particularly in the Japanese context, have a very clear understanding of who they are as a student, who the teacher is as a student, who the teacher is as a teacher, that the teacher is the source of information and they are the receiver of information. So the dynamic between student and teacher in advising is much clearer for them. I would hope that as they move up into their second or third year at university, that they would sort of break down that system a little bit, and then they can seek out peers or near peers to get that advice and to not even get that advice, but to get that feedback, to talk with other people at their level or just above their level about what they're doing. And at that stage, I would hope that the student staff could provide that as well. There is the difficulty of the student staff that are in the third and the fourth year at my school are tending to be graduate students, and they're going to be doing their thesis, and they're going to be, quite intensive studies at that stage. So their availability drops off. When they're at that stage where they have a lot of information they could pass down to the first and second year students, they don't actually have much time. So
okay, so that's going to be a challenge there, how to kind of bring them in still, right?
Yeah.
I think there might be something in the senpai kohai dynamic, or the kind of the senior junior relationship, which is quite common among peers here in Japan. That like if you're able to get those more experienced learners to come in, you could kind of use that as a way to kind of help them with the learning advising.
Yeah. And we definitely get during the lunchtime chat, it'll start with how's your day, what did you eat for breakfast, and then it'll quite regularly shift to, oh, what classes did you have today? Oh, it was that teacher. Oh, how are you doing with your homework? Because their homework's really, it'll naturally evolve into these discussions of the senpai kohai of like, oh, next year you should try to enroll in this class because teachers, whatever,
Right.
Which is great. It's students passing on experience and advice and coping mechanisms.
Of course. Are there any other directions that you see the iSpace developing in, other than having more learning advising?
I would like to get the student staff to take more control over situations.
Okay.
How the roles and responsibilities of student staff were quite flexible this year as we were sort of finding our groove and finding what worked and what didn't. Originally, I was doing a shotgun approach and hiring a lot of different students from a lot of different departments because I thought they would bring in their friends. But in the second semester, I found that having a small core number of student staff, they were able to feel more in control. Because they could coordinate between each other and then come to a decision rather than trying to coordinate with 15, 16 other people.
Right.
So there's pros and cons of both. With my situation, because I have a large number of classes, I'm not in the space as often, I have to give more responsibility to my student staff. And so having student staff who feel confident taking that responsibility because they have a level of authority has made things run smoother.
Right. Yeah, you'll need some kind of way to transfer that responsibility between different generations.
Yeah. And so I'll have to bring in new staff next semester and have them be trained by the older staff in order for it to be able to separate from me a little bit.
But that's part of community development, right? So if you were to put yourself in the shoes of someone else that was just coming into your position in another situation, what encouragement would you give them? What kind of resources would you point them towards? Just generally, like, what advice would you give someone in that position?
Don't get hung up on doing the right thing, because the right thing is going to be according to what your students need. So being really open to what your students need, and what they're asking for might not match with what your teacher beliefs are. I was pushing for fluency, let's practice in a natural environment, let's practice chatting, like don't worry about, grammar and vocabulary. But students were repeatedly saying, but I have to pass the TOEIC test. Like that is their, so actually shutting down my teacher voice and saying, no, what they really need in life right now is to be able to pass this test. I'm going to meet that need rather than meet the need that I'm imposing on them.
Mm.
And that any amount of support that you're providing is going to be beneficial, even if it's, you know, micro scale, someone was able to read an extra book. It's invaluable for students. So don't get hung up on how many students did I have attend, or a student came once and never came back, but they were able to get something from you. They were benefiting from this dynamic, and that is what you're there for. You're not there to make them pass a test. You're not there to make them be a fluent speaker. You're there to show them that they can help themselves if they reach out in the right way.
Absolutely.
So it's kind of separate that teacher identity from the self-access identity, because they're going to do different things.
Okay. Are there any kind of online resources or like groups, associations, I know that were helpful to you and that would be useful for any kind of new person starting off in the field to access easily from wherever they are?
JASL is a great organization if you're in Japan. JASAL. They have conferences and meetings and publications, and a lot of it's free and online as well, so it's not prohibitive in that way. They also have a database of self-access centers in Japan.
Okay.
And you can go and put your name, your contact information, the spaces information, what resources you have, and they range from very, very small to very, very large. So if you're looking for a peer to talk to, I would add your space in there and then look at other ones that are similar to your own and contact those people and say, hey, I'm trying to start, you know, a tiny little center in my classroom once a week.
Right.
What do you recommend?
Super.
Places like Penguin and Macmillan have graded readers, but they'll also send you a sample pack if you request it. So they'll send you out 10 graded reader books.
Mm-hmm.
And it's there are ways to get resources and funding and budgets and things, but using what you have is important as well at the first stages. You know, okay, the school has computers, they're not in my self-access center, but maybe I'll request that once a week we'll have like an English computer club. And it's not so much the computers that will draw students in, it's the people.
Mm-hmm.
So it's you being there, you being welcoming, you being interested. And then they might bring their friends, and then it's a social thing, it's a fun thing. And
okay. So really the community.
Yeah. Especially when you're small. Yeah.
Okay. I'm mindful of your time. Gone, and we've talked for quite a while, but is there any important question I should have asked you that I didn't? And there's something you really, you know, think we should have discussed that we didn't talk about?
I would talk a little bit about breaking down boundaries within an organization. In the Japanese context, English study or English language study has been steadily dropping over the years. I think there is still a great interest in English, but fewer students are studying English, you know, solely. So being able to reach out to other departments or other students who are not in the English department or not in the language learning department is really key, because there are students out there who are not solely focused on English who are still interested in English. And really, they're the ones that need more support in self-access, because they don't have teachers who are deeply ingrained in language learning. They don't have, you know, textbooks or resources that they can teach themselves from. Looking at breaking down the barriers between teacher and student, of saying, well, I'm on my lunch break in the self-access center. I'm not going to act like a teacher now. I'm not going to berate someone about their homework or correct their grammar too intensely. Because a self-access center should be this sort of middle ground between all these other formalized structures. And that's what will help students to find their own space and find their own wants and needs and grounding and what they're going to work on and things like that. Yeah.
Wise words to end on. Well, yeah, thank you very much, Isobel, for a really, really interesting conversation. I think that'll be useful to anybody that's considering doing what you've done. And yeah, thank you very much for your time.
Yeah.
I really enjoyed this conversation. I hope you did as well, and I hope it's useful to anybody else that's watching this. And look forward to more interesting conversations in the future. So, thanks very much.
Thank you.
Thanks.